Great, and if you haven't introduced yourself, please do. Love to hear from all of you. We'll have plenty of information throughout the day in the chat box, lots of links to our upcoming initiatives and events. So please look at our chat box, and you'll hear more about that in just a minute. And we're up to 84 participants already, which is wonderful. Yes, and Emily's mentioning our survey, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes as well. So it appears that I don't have anyone in the waiting room just yet. So Jeannie, if you want to kick us off.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, Melissa. And welcome everyone. Good morning. You know, whenever we do these things, we hope for two things: that technology works and the dog doesn't bark. I'm just saying. One's downstairs, one's up here, fingers crossed. But thank you so much for attending this morning's community conversation. We are appreciative of your time, and we are grateful, so grateful to AmerisourceBergen Foundation and to Marist College for their support of this event. Unfortunately, due to the financial fallout from COVID-19 epidemic, United Way is concerned of potential widespread evictions in our community. In fact, the data has shown that 40 million people across the nation are at risk of losing their housing in the coming year. Now that is daunting. While the moratorium has prevented widespread evictions to this point, it is a safety precaution to keep our shelter system from being inundated during this devastating health crisis. And this does not take into account the potential 8 months of back rent that some families might owe their landlords and lenders. So this dire situation is compounded with the fact that our nation is facing a reckoning regarding systemic racism and inequity that has hurt so many community members and limited their opportunity. At United Way globally, we are taking actionable steps to be accountable to our communities and to continue to fight for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in our community. We are committed to the anti-racist principles and a society that is committed to equitable access. Finally, we understand as a nonprofit ourselves that we have all have to pivot, the 2020 word, right? But fundraising is getting fundraising is getting harder, and getting your message out there has never been more challenging. We are all virtually fundraising through this global pandemic, and we are there with you. So today I am pleased to present a community conversation around housing and equity. We have with us Inaudy Esposito, the Executive Director of the Orange County Human Rights Commission. And she is fabulous. If you've never heard her speak, I'm always just amazed. So thank you, Inaudy. And she's going to provide our keynote around equity and esteemed panel of presenters from various housing sectors who provide recommendations. And we also have a panel of professor and student experts who will provide tools to support your fundraising and marketing strategies. So this is really jam-packed today. I would like to thank my amazing staff. This doesn't get done without them, that's for sure. And finally, I'm going to ask you all for a favor. Since we do not have the ability to all be together, 200 of us to meet in person and to provide us feedback, we're asking for you to give us feedback throughout the day in the chat box, or you can email us. But this information, we're going to put in our request for proposal priorities for the following year, our RFP, as you all know. And this will be incorporated into our strategy, our upcoming funding strategy. So it's really important, and we want to hear from you. And again, I want to thank our amazing presenters for being with us this morning, and to each of our generous sponsors, and to all of you for being here with us. I want to thank each and every one of you for all of the important work that you do every day to keep our families safe and financially secure. And I hope each of you and your families are safe and healthy, and that sometime soon we can be together again. It's been a while, that's for sure. But thank you so much for joining us this morning. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Melissa Clark, and she is our Senior Director of Community Impact. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. I would like to echo what you said, and again, thank our wonderful presenters this morning and each of you for being here with us. I would reiterate that we really hope you will provide real-time feedback in our Zoom chat box to inform our upcoming funding priorities. And if you can keep your cameras on, we'd love to see your smiling faces. As for format, we will take short breaks in between each of our 3 presentations this morning. I really hope that you can stay with us all day. I would also like to mention that we have our Esprit Task Force meeting on Monday, October 26th. And you can reach out to Peter for some more information, and I'm sure he'll put some info in the chat box. And our next financial stability workshop around first-time homebuyers in partnership with Rhinebeck Bank on November 18th. We hope you can join us there as well, and I'm sure Yadira Sims will also put some information in the chat box about that. We also have an ALICE survey, which I know Emily has been putting information in the chat box as well, and that is bilingual, and we really hope that you can share it out with your constituents and families. We're conducting a statewide survey, in fact, around our ALICE data, and of course, there hasn't been a more financially distressing time in a decade. We really hope that you can share and encourage the families you serve to participate. We continue to offer opportunities to access our COVID relief fund should your organization be in need of up to $500 to assist with PPE for reopening, food access needs, or basic essentials. Please just write us a quick letter on letterhead and we will assist shortly. Additionally, we continue to offer our weekly day of sharing pickup opportunities every Thursday, as well as I heard we have tons of school supplies to give out, several pallets. And I think Rebecca's going to give her contact information as well, so you can schedule a time to pick up with her. We're also conducting a holiday gift drive and have an Amazon wish list of items that you can purchase to help families have a brighter holiday season. And finally, our holiday helping hand applications are due tomorrow to assist with holiday parties or gift cards in Dutchess County. So please submit your application for Dutchess County nonprofits if you haven't already. And I just want to thank you all so much for everything you do in our community. I know this is, for many of us, the most challenging time in our lives, and we really appreciate everything that you do every day to help everybody. So thank you. Please stay safe out there, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Inaudy Esposito. Inaudy is an avid advocate and voice for targeted and oppressed communities. Born in the Dominican Republic, Inaudy immigrated to the United States as a child and has lived in the Hudson Valley since 2003. Her expertise is in social justice, diversity and inclusion, and gender violence issues, including intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Inaudy was an English as a second language instructor at SUNY Orange for over 10 years and works tirelessly on eliminating oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, and gender inequity in her community. She sat on numerous boards and committees, including the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault, Leadership Orange, the Orange County Cultural Equity Task Force, and Newburgh Ministry. Inaudy has received multiple recognitions, including an Orange County Women of Achievement Award and Rising Star recognitions in both Orange County and New York State. She is a sought-after speaker, as you can see, and has presented at numerous conferences, including the 2018 TEDx Newburgh, where she discussed diversity and privilege in her talk, Turning Differences into Strengths, which is great. You can check it out on YouTube. We watched it. Inaudy is the executive director of the Orange County Human Rights Commission, whose primary purpose is to foster mutual respect and understanding among all groups in the county. The commission coordinates and facilitates educational and awareness programs in order to promote understanding of equity, acceptance, unity, and humanity. So let's all welcome Inaudy.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you, Jeannie, for that as well. Good morning, everyone. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces and so many familiar names. It is my pleasure to be here and have a little bit of time to speak to you all about inequity, about equity, and some of the issues that our nation is facing right now. So I'm just gonna get myself settled over here, get rid of this. Perfect. So welcome, and again, thank you so much for joining us all. It is really wonderful thing that United Way is including this as one of their really important conversations. And not just today, but throughout the last 6 months, United Way has answered the call to the need and the importance of having these tough conversations, no matter how tough they are. So before I start, I always like to kind of review what I call the pillars of having tough conversations. And really what it is, it's just, you know, a discussion around 3 really important things to keep in mind, and not just for today during this conversation, but I like to say just whenever you're having a tough conversation with someone, especially in the climate that we're in right now, where everything is so tense and everything is emotional and everything is affecting many of us personally. So I ask for you to consider respect, openness, and discomfort. So really, when I say I ask for respect, I'm not talking about, you know, raise your hand, don't speak over each other. You know, those are kind of things that we should kind of already have in our arsenal. What I'm talking about when I talk about respect is I'm talking about respecting someone else's position and understanding that we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different walks in life and have had different experiences. So just because your experience isn't similar or the same as mine doesn't make my experience less valid. So it is really important that we are able to, in a conversation, respect each other's experiences. And that will require openness. It will require us to kind of do some critical thinking around some of the things that we have always known, or some of the things that we have always thought to be true. So it requires a little openness around the information I'm going to share with you. It requires openness around having a conversation with your neighbor or your colleague about their experience, and then understanding that those conversations and that openness may actually lead to discomfort. The reality is that, again, when we are having tough conversations around things like racism, around things like privilege, some people are uncomfortable, especially when they don't fully understand what we're referring to, what we're talking about. So if you do experience discomfort in any of the, any of the things that I'm discussing, I ask you to just sit with me. I ask you to sit with the discomfort and then consider it. Ask yourself, well, what about what she just said made me uncomfortable? And then go back to the openness and the respect and the ability to think about, well, that's someone else's experience, and the ability to be almost empathetic with someone. And I say almost because I understand we can't always be empathetic with everyone about everything, but just understand that part of the growth, part of that growing edge is actually being able to sit with your discomfort and then analyze it and consider, where is it coming from? So I'm going to apologize because as co-host, every time someone joins the waiting room, I got these 2 bars on my screen, which will inevitably come up as black bars on your screen. So I will try to get rid of them as soon as possible. So before we start our conversation on equity, I want to make sure that we are on the same page as to the difference between equality and equity, because for a lot of the things we're going to talk about, I am not just talking about equality, or I'm not talking about equality at all. I am talking about equity. So here's an awesome image that many of you, I'm sure, have seen before. It really, for me personally, shows a great example of the difference between equality and equity. Some people like to use the image with the 3 people watching, I don't know if it's a baseball game or something. There's a fence and then there's boxes where somebody's trying to, the smaller person's trying to see. And I prefer the one on the bicycle because I think it just makes more sense visually to me. So equality is when you give everyone the same amount of resources, right? So in this top picture, we obviously see everybody gets a bicycle. Wonderful, right? The problem is, okay, great, you all have bicycles, but not everyone is able to ride a bicycle the same way, right? So if we look at the bottom picture, when we're actually considering equity, we're actually considering now not just everybody having access to the same things, but now we're talking about people having, and communities having, access to the things that they need. And that's the difference between equality and equity. It's not about, equally sharing things. it's about understanding and sometimes having the tough conversations about how we need things differently. And I think this bottom picture with the size of the bikes and then the different types of bikes just perfectly demonstrates not all of us need the same type of services, not all of us need the same type of resources, or even at the same time. And that's where equity comes in place. I also want to start really with a brief introduction and understanding that to understand inequity in our country, we also need to be able to understand systemic racism, right? We need to be able to understand where, how we got to where we are today. So I want to just play a quick video for you all, which is a history on racism and oppression in America. Melissa, you'll let me know, please, if the sound isn't working.
Never underestimate the power of the people when they understand the message. Never underestimate that. I think that this is something that can be done quite quickly. I think it's something that can be done rather efficiently. It's just going to require a large enough parade. It's going to require a large enough people to understand the core concepts. And that's the real work that we have to do right now, is hit that critical tipping point, which is probably around 20 or 30% of the voting populace actually understanding the issue.
And a big part of the issue when creating a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy movement is an understanding of how race and racism were constructed in the United States through law, and how those laws informed our culture in much the same way those corporate rights have been constructed through the law to ensure rule of the wealthy minority over the majority, and how our culture reinforces and legitimizes that lack of democracy. Right from the very beginning, Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution defined people as property. You see, the authors of the Constitution were very interested in protecting their property, including slaves. No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. The Indian Removal Act of 1830. Indigenous communities are forced from their homelands. Over 10 years, 100,000 native children and adults marched thousands of miles west into unknown arid territory. 15,000 do not survive the journey. But over 25 million acres of land is made available for white settlers. 1854, the People versus Hall. Non-whites are barred from testifying in court. No black, mulatto, or Indian shall be allowed to give evidence in favor of or against a white man. 1857, Dred Scott versus Sanford. Free blacks are taxed, but still have no rights of citizenship granted to whites. 1862, Emancipation Proclamation in District of Columbia. Slaves are freed in D.C., but former slave owners are reimbursed for slaves given up. Whites are paid over $1 million in reparations for lost property. 1862, Homestead Act. 50 million acres of formerly indigenous land in the West, having been violently invaded by U.S. soldiers in violation of treaties, is distributed by the government at low cost to white settlers only. And 100 million acres of indigenous land are given for free to railroad developers. 1882, Chinese Exclusion Act bans immigration of both skilled and unskilled Chinese laborers. 1924, Johnson-Reed Act creates an immigration quota system based on national origin, favoring Nordics over the inferior races of Asia and Southern and Eastern Europe. 1934, in the wake of the Great Depression, the National Housing Act is implemented, creating a federal housing authority to provide loans and federal subsidies for home ownership, but the FHA mortgage underwriting standards discriminate against non-whites and investment in non-white communities through a process called redlining. 1942, an executive order forces 111,000 Japanese Americans into concentration camps. And the war on drugs declared by Richard Nixon violently targets and imprisons people of color disproportionately through today.
Righteous anger can only be provoked by anger at injustice or unfairness. And I'm angry about the fact that we've got 20 to 25% of the children in the richest country in the world who go to bed hungry or undernourished every night. I'm angry about the fact that we have transnational corporations that are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself. And I'm angry about the fact that the world that's being created with the rape and plunder of Mother Earth is a racist, sexist, and class oppressive society. You bet I'm angry. I'm angry because it doesn't have to be this way.
Are we in a class war right now?
Of course we are. And, you know, Warren Buffett, I think, said it the clearest. He said, we're in a class war, and we've been in a class war for years, and my class is winning. And who is his class? The owning class, the people who own these corporations.
So it's important that we have some context in this conversation, which is why I shared that with you all. Because, you know, in a 45-minute conversation, there's no way I'll be able to give you all of the history. Even in a 3-hour conversation, there's no way. But it really sets the tone and kind of helps us set the foundation for the conversation around inequity in some of our systems. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about a few of our systems and how we experience inequity, specifically around Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The first one I'm going to talk about is the health system. The CDC did a report a few years ago now where it actually was quoted saying that a person's zip code is a stronger predictor to their potential health outcome than their genetic code. A person's zip code, so where you live, is actually a stronger predictor to your potential health outcome than your genetic code. And if we consider Orange County, and I know there may be some folks here from Dutchess County, so I'm sure the situation's similar for you. If you think about the zip codes in our county, and you think about the major cities, this will kind of make a little bit of sense for you, right? And many of us here, if not all of us, we are familiar with the term social determinants of health, so I won't spend too much time talking about that. But those are things that are important for you to consider. The fact that where you live actually matters when it comes to your health outcome. It matters to economic stability, the social and community context, meaning the amount of discrimination you may experience based on where you live, mental health issues, the community engagement, your neighborhood and your environment, meaning what kind of housing is available, right? And I know that today's all about housing, so we'll get to hear a little bit about that later, especially when we talk about things like affordable housing, transportation, right? If you consider the availability of transportation or lack thereof, of some of our neighborhoods, you will really kind of start to consider some of the biggest challenges that the people in our community experience. Things like healthcare, you know, what kind of access do folks have to healthcare? What kind of access do folks have to insurance, right? And then once they are in the healthcare system, you know, what kind of quality are they getting when it comes to their care? And then the cultural competency. We are lucky because in our county, we have some really excellent partners in our healthcare systems that understand things like social determinants of health. That understands things like bias and are constantly trying to stay ahead of the game and understand that, you know, we're in this work for the long run. To look at some numbers to kind of help us understand the inequities and how social determinants of health actually play out when it comes to statistics. On the top left here, we have the percentage of premature deaths, which is defined by anything before the age of 75 years. And this is by race, ethnicity. And this is Orange County versus New York State, right? And these numbers, the most recent ones that are available are as far as between 2014 and 2016. So if we look over here, right? Orange bar represents white folks who have, again, passed due to premature deaths before the age of 75. The gray bar shows us the Black community. And then the dark orange, kind of burnt orange color, Hispanic. And if we see here, the disparities are clear, right? So as a state in New York, 35% of the deaths represented by white folks, 57.6% by Black folks, and 53.8% by Hispanic folks. And Orange County has no different in that number. If anything, we jump up a couple of digits there in the percentage. It's 40% white, 60% Black, and 59.9% Hispanic. So what that tells us is something's going on, right? What this tells us is that, you know, and if you talk to experts, the first thing they'll talk about is pre-existing conditions. So pre-existing conditions are actually impacting people of color, right? Impacting Black folks, Hispanic folks at a much higher level and higher rates than that of their white counterparts. And if we go back to understanding social determinants of health and talking about a person's zip code, right, being a stronger predictor for their potential health, then we understand that all of these issues, economic stability, social community context, education, healthcare, et cetera, actually play a really important role, even in how long someone lives, or even in someone's quality of life. Another really important number to consider is pregnancy-related deaths, so maternal infant deaths. And this is actually really something important because these numbers have continued to grow in the United States for the last 30 years. Mothers who are dying, and maternal infant death is considered a death related within the first year, and it's related to childbirth or while the mother is pregnant or birthing. So we have women who are dying during childbirth. And unfortunately, if we look here at the bars, the dark blue represents Black, the dark orange represents American Indian, Alaskan Native, gray Asian, orange, white, blue, Hispanic. If we look at the discrepancy here, just at the bars, we can see that these numbers are astronomically different. In some states, including New York State, these numbers are actually even more, a bigger difference. In New York State, a Black woman is actually 4 times more likely to die in child's labor or maternal infant death related than a white woman. And that's just unacceptable. And when we talk to the experts, the answer is pre-existing conditions. And again, if we're considering, well, where are these pre-existing conditions coming from, and understand social determinants of health, then we understand that we have some serious issues that need to be dealt with within our communities. You may be happy to know that the numbers in Orange County for maternal infant deaths are so equally the same that the numbers don't even, there is no difference here. So that's a positive thing for us here in the county. When we talk about COVID, and I keep saying pre-existing condition, and we know that that's one of the biggest things that has been discussed during the COVID era. Let's look at some of these numbers. So the New York Times actually came out with a report back in July of this year. And it's interesting because when you look at numbers and you consider statistics, normally things aren't as updated as something like this, right? This was less than 6 months ago. Most data is 3 or 4 years old because that's how long it takes to compile, that's how long it takes for reports, etc. But something like COVID, where we're still in the middle of it, even data from July 2020 feels like it's really old and outdated, right? But it's what we have, it's what we're going with. So overall in the United States, per 10,000 people, 23 of those people who were COVID positive were white. Black was 62 and Latino was 73. So we are talking about, in some instances, COVID affected different folks in ethnic and racial background 3 times more than they did of their white counterparts. If we look locally, in Orange County, it was very similar, right? So out of, per 10,000 cases, 95 of those were white, 206, so more than double of those cases were Black, and then 262 Hispanic. Asian was 61. And interesting enough, there was a lot of racism around Asian folks with the virus, right? you know, people calling it the China virus, people looking at Asian folks as if it's, you know, they're the ones who brought it, they're the ones who have it, they're the ones, etc. How many stories didn't we hear of people no longer eating Chinese food, or, you know, just flat out discrimination over it? But when we look at the numbers as to, you know, who was coming up positive, we understand that obviously it impacted our entire community, and disproportionately impacted some communities more than others. If we look at other counties close to us, so Westchester, again, similar. In Westchester, cases per 10,000, so 60 of those cases were white, 100 would have been Black, 72 Hispanic. So here in Westchester, we saw the Black community getting hit more than the Hispanic community. And then in Rockland County, similar to the other counties and to the state, where we saw Hispanic folks, or are still seeing Hispanic folks, getting 3 times more likely to get COVID than that of their other counterparts. It's really important that we understand, in addition to pre-existing conditions like we discussed earlier, as far as social determinants of health, in addition to the fact that, you know, within the inner cities, we have higher density population and higher density housing. It's really important that we also understand that it is Black and Hispanic folks that are making up a lot of the fields and, you know, workspaces where they were not able to stay home and work from home. We have to consider the fact that, you know, something like 60% of the working force population that had to stay home were Black and Hispanic. So it is not just a simple, well, pre-existing conditions, this is why, right? Or, you know, high density homes or residencies. No, there's a lot to really consider here, but it goes back to social determinants of health. It goes back to where are we, you know, employed? How is our health? How do we have access to it? Are we able to? You know, when you think about, you know, let's say the populations and the communities that don't speak English, I want you to consider the different access or lack thereof of information that has been published in their language, right? We have a lot of different, and I'm thinking of Newburgh, different communities that speak different languages, right? Majority Spanish, and we also have Haitian Creole. So when I think about, you know, the things that we're putting out there and the communication that we're putting out there and how we're informing our community of the pandemic, of the thing and the things that need to be done to prevent it, I really am thinking of, is this reaching everyone equally, right? Because remember, when we're talking about equal and equitable, right, it may require not just, you know, the translation of forms, but those communities may require a little extra effort, right? Figuring out, how do we get to the places where everyone is in? How do we get to the places where everybody can hear our message and be able to access the information? Another one of the systems I want to talk about is the wealth gap in America and housing inequity. If we look at, just gotta hide these bars for everyone. My apologies because they keep popping up. Put this one here. If we look at the past 70 years, economists have been quoted by saying that no progress has actually been made in reducing income and wealth inequalities between Black and white households over the past 70 years. And if we look at the different numbers, something like unemployment rate, for example, and this was early 2000s, right? So the gray shows the white community, blue show Hispanic, and then the dark, let's call that burgundy, shows the Black community. There has always been a very large discrepancy. And if we look at, you know, the trajectory, and if we look at around the recession time, you know, those numbers all went up, but still they didn't come even close to each other, right? And if we look at 2020, which is where we are today, those numbers obviously going up based on the pandemic and everything that's going on, but still disproportionately, we see that the Black community is being hit the hardest. When it comes to the median net worth by race and ethnicity between 1989 and 2016, again, we are seeing a very large disproportionate numbers here. So if we were to look at 2016, and this is about, let's say, $171,000, and I think it's the actual numbers, is the median net worth of a white family versus a Black family that is under $20,000. Those are really big differences that just merely can't be made up by someone working really hard, right? And that's something that we need to kind of start, putting our minds around when we understand the difference between equality and equity. The wealth gap, right, is the product of centuries of inequality and racism that, according to experts, right, we're talking about the Federal Reserve System, the U.S. Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, and different, professionals and experts, this wealth gap has grown too large to be impacted significantly by just individual actions or achievements, right? If you break down the U.S. median household net worth by race and education, you'll see exactly that. So a white family in 2014, post-college income was an average of $455,000. Same education, a Black family was $141,000. And if we get lower and lower here, we see here, less than high school, a white person is still able to make $82,000 versus a Black person stays below $3,000. So even with similar education, even with similar, professional experience, etc., a Black person and a white person, or a Black and a white family household will still significantly make less. I mean, if you compare some of this, the Black family's income here after post-college is actually just about a little bit over what a white family would have with some college education. To really understand that, you would have to consider how systemic racism plays a role in the entire life of a Black family or of Black communities, because we are talking about things like, housing, we're talking about things like inheritance, we are talking about a lot of different things, right? Not just that one choice of, or ability or opportunity of going to college, right? And even then, you see study after study that talks about how Black folks who graduate from college are still less likely to find jobs than their white counterparts. And when they do find jobs, they're still getting paid less than their white counterparts. Or we've seen the study, and if any of you here, which I know many of you have sat through any of my diversity and inclusion trainings, we talk a lot about the bias around recruiting, right? And around resumes. And multiple studies have been done where they take one resume, they copy that resume. So now you have two copies of the same resume, but they change the names on it. One is a white sounding name. The other one is what they call an ethnic or a Black sounding name. And time again, that white sounding name resume gets called double the time that the white or the Black or the ethnic sounding name resume gets called. So all of this, plays a really important role when we talk about the wealth gap in America. Let's learn a little bit about the housing segregation and redlining and how that has impacted the wealth gap.
Racial segregation in the U.S. is not in our past. It's our present. There's a crazy wealth gap between white and Black Americans that's tied to home ownership. White Americans hold 7 times the wealth of Black Americans, the same ratio as in the Civil Rights era. And even though Black people make up nearly 13% of the U.S. population, they hold less than 3% of the nation's wealth. Now you have to understand that owning property is the major way American families build wealth. But when state-mandated discrimination stops Black people from owning their homes, the growth of their wealth gets halted too. Okay, we have to go way back to see how this happened. When the Great Depression hit, the federal government created public housing to help American families for the first time. They mostly made public housing projects for white people, but there were some made for Black folks too. By the mid-1930s, the government was offering subsidized mortgages at a fraction of the price for white families, so they could move into brand new houses in the suburbs. Black people were specifically prohibited from these deals. They instead had to stay in public housing, often paying more for their rent than white families paid in mortgage. On top of that, the practice of redlining grew across the nation. The HOLC created city maps to indicate the level of risk for real estate investments. These maps ranked desirable neighborhoods for lending, such as white suburbs, in green, and marked undesirable undesirable or risky neighborhoods, often populated by Black communities, in red. As a result, redlining destroyed the possibility of investment wherever Black people live, ruining their chances at growing their wealth, property, or social mobility. Meanwhile, the government bagged $120 billion in low-cost home loans between 1934 and 1962. More than 98% of these loans went to white homebuyers. By the time housing segregation was banned in the Fair Housing Act of 1968, it was too little, too late. The damage was already done for generations. The inequity of homeownership had launched a domino effect that made it far too difficult for Black families to try and purchase homes in similar suburbs. These neighborhoods had quadrupled in value over time, leaving Black Americans far behind. Today, 73% of white households are homeowners, while the percentage for Black households is only 45%. Even worse, Black people who reached homeownership sometimes faced violence as a result, at the hands of white Americans and police. Racially segregated neighborhoods have a grave impact on many realms of American life. Where you live can determine what kind of education is available for your children, how much wealth you can have, your relationship with law enforcement, and even your own family's health. The biggest takeaway from all of this? Racial segregation and the wealth gap in the U.S. is not just due to personal prejudice or private actions. Instead, it's a direct result of state-sanctioned policies intended to stop Black Americans from achieving success that in many ways continues today.
So again, going back to what we said earlier, when we talked about a person's zip code, right? It's important to understand that. It's important to understand that the opportunity hasn't always been there, and that when it is there, it's not equitable either. When we look at home ownership rates by race or ethnicity, and this was touched on a little bit in the video, we are looking at about 45% Black, a little bit over 50% in general. Others, white families over 70%, and Hispanic actually about 47%. During this COVID crisis, 28% is the number that represents Black homeowners who couldn't pay or defer their mortgage payments in May. And that's compared with just 9% of white homeowners. So even understanding something like that is really important to understand just the wealth gap in America and where we all kind of stand as a whole, right? Obviously, individually, that could be a little different, but as a whole in general, we look at these numbers. 40% is a number representing that less likely Black families are to own their home than white families. And then another really, I think, important number to know is that roughly 1 in 6 Black and Hispanic households actually spent more than 50% of their income on housing, leaving them with fewer resources to devote to their, things like children's education, healthcare, and even basic needs. I know for a fact that this will be somewhat of a conversation that we have later on the panel. Knowing the panelists, when we talk about things like affordable housing, for many people in our community, specific people of color, that 50% of their income on housing is more like 75% of their income on housing, because we understand that affordable housing is just not something we actually have very available or accessible here in our community. So I want to wrap up talking a little bit about equity in the workplace, because there's a lot of conversation that's been going on around DEI, right? Diversity and inclusion. And I won't talk too much about diversity and inclusion. As we understand, diversity is, what you have, right? I have this line, diversity is what you have, and inclusion is what you do with it. In that line, I stole from someone who stole it from someone who borrowed it from somebody else. We keep borrowing it from each other. But we need to understand that these things cannot work alone. If we're going to talk about equity, we can't not talk about diversity and inclusion. And if we're going to talk about diversity, we can't not talk about inclusion, because diversity alone will not create equity and inclusion in the workplace or anywhere. We need to move beyond diversity. Organizations have to work on understanding that the systems we are a part of carry a lot of systemic racism, and we need to talk about institutions not being equitable so that we can start moving beyond this having a seat at the table mentality. It is great to have a seat at the table, but now we talk about, well, once you have that seat, what does that look like? And now we're talking into inclusion. right? And it requires, leaders to invest time, resources, to be willing to take risks, to make progress, right? And we understand that that takes a long time. We understand that, none of this can be done overnight. I was doing a similar presentation yesterday for a state conference, and someone asked, is there any low-hanging fruit, he worded, on how, companies and agencies can work on DEI. And I said, no, I'm sorry, there is no low-hanging fruit, because this work takes time. This work takes commitment. And this work is not an overnight thing. There are things we can all do on an everyday basis, including, communication, creating spaces for these conversations to take place. But in the end, this is not a human resource issue. It's a strategic issue. And, we have to see efforts around the mission, the vision, the values. It has to be incorporated into everything in our agencies, et cetera, so that we're really able to put them into place. This is something that I've adapted from one of the local agencies, the Mental Health Association, because I think they have really worded it really excellently in their cultural equity plan. And that's that cultural equity demands an ongoing commitment to openness and learning. It's taking the time and taking risks. It's sitting with uncertainty and discomfort, and it's not having quick solutions or easy answers. It involves building trust. It involves mentoring, developing and nurturing a frame of reference that considers alliances across cultures as enriching rather than threatening. And when we talk about what does equity, cultural equity look in your workplace, that is what you should be really considering. It's about how do we build organizations? How do we help, bring folks up that, really will make a long-lasting difference in our institutions and organizations? By focusing on equity, an organization has to address all aspects of their work, right? Everything from the top, right? From the beginning. Where are you posting your job openings? Is the language accessible? Are you listing skills that actually allow people to apply? If you're listing master's degree preferred, is that because you think that master's degree is something that is valued more than community experience? Or can we start valuing community experience as much as we value education? Is it our funders that's requesting that these degrees be put there? Or are we trying to be competitive with other places? And in doing so, excluding people from being able to apply. Another one is, must be able to lift 25 pounds. If your job description includes that, which I know many agencies do, I want you to actually ask yourself, does that person actually need to lift 25 pounds? Or are we adding yet another barrier that may be excluding some folks who may really not be able to physically lift 25 pounds and has all these excellent skills, but can't even apply to the job because of it? So just two standards that I want to leave you with. The first one is treating everyone the same, maybe unintentionally oppressive. Individuality is important. Of course, we all want to walk away being treated as individuals. I want to be treated like Inaudy. I don't want to be seen as, any one of these other things. But the reality of it is that that's just not life, because Inaudy is, has been shaped by my experiences based on my identities as a heterosexual woman, as a heteronormative woman, as an able-bodied woman, as a Latina, as an immigrant. So remembering and understanding the historical injustices and mistreatment and, oppression that my people have had to go through, I think is really important for me as an individual to know that others understand that when they see me and appreciate me for who I am, but also understand the larger historical context that comes with the people that I represent. And then understanding that ignoring those historical oppressions, right? Being colorblind is not really, it's actually failing to understand needs of people, individuals and groups, right? And then the final one is that understanding that we need to build and cultivate teams around us if we want to bring long-lasting cultural and institutional change. We cannot do this by ourselves. We cannot do this overnight. It requires the help of others. It requires long-term work, patience, but it really requires leaders to cultivate that team and organize. It may require, setting up committees, goals, tasks that you can achieve. But, really the importance of it is that it does take a lot of work and we can't do it by ourselves. We may not be able to change institutions, but we can certainly change the individuals who have the power to set those policies within those institutions. I want to allow a few minutes in case there are any questions or comments. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I haven't looked in the chat box, so I don't know if there are any questions. Melissa, I'm going to.
Thank you, Inaudy. Yes, there have been a lot of comments, not too many questions, and just more requests for the data that you had and, just the incredible information that you're sharing with us. But does anyone want to, while we have a few minutes for questions, add a couple right now into the chat box? Malcolm, if you want to just type it in, or I can unmute you. I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, Inaudy. That's how you say it, Inaudy?
No, Inaudy.
Inaudy. Thank you. I see what everyone was saying. I feel your passion. Thank you for doing this. Real simple, real quick. You move up in leadership, as you are in your career. And for me, I've had the privilege of being here in Orange County and getting back to grassroots, getting back to that frontline work, seeing the people in Orange County who are struggling with substance abuse, the addiction process, and working with them. Where are we headed here? Because the numbers are staggering. And I see all of these wonderful folks on here. When do y'all get together? Like, when this is powerful. This is fantastic. I'm looking at what's next? Where do you go from here? Is there a plan? I'm so excited, because this is where decisions can be made, action can be taken. What's next here?
So Malcolm, the question is not when do we, it's when do we not meet? When do we not have a monthly meeting or a constant coalition? I have to say that being part of this network for about 15 years now, I see it, Malcolm, and I've heard time again and again on how impressive Orange County is when it comes to the collaborations that we have. Listen, Orange County has a whole lot of issues, right? But we collaborate and we get together. And Esprit is actually one of the excellent resources that we have in this community. I'm sure Melissa will tell you all about the monthly meetings. I highly urge you to come and attend. There's time for networking and talking to others. And there is a slew of list of other meetings that take place. There's Team Newburgh, there's Middletown Cares, there's just so many other groups that really involve everybody on this call, right? Representatives from different levels of our agencies that are working on this. And the opioid epidemic has something that has been tackled head on aggressively in this county, and I know our neighboring counties as well, because once upon a time, Orange County was on the top of overdoses. And in a few years, when we got that number, and I'm speaking to the county responded immediately saying, oh, this is unacceptable. We're not letting our people die on something that we can absolutely help with. And, there's been a lot of collaboration on that. Melissa, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I'll just echo what you're saying, Inaudy. There are absolutely a lot of great coalition meetings in Orange County and Dutchess County as well. We do have our Esprit meeting on Monday at 10 a.m. on Zoom, and we'd love for folks to join us. It's Anti-Poverty Coalition and also a great networking forum for us all to come together and continue that work. And Malcolm, I know you're very active in Esprit as well. We also have our Dutchess County BAT meetings as well, which is another forum, and we meet every other month for Dutchess County folks. If you're not connected to BAT, we have about 450 service providers on that listserv. So definitely feel free to email me and I can get you on that list, and we send out weekly updates as well. So there's definitely lots of ways to continue connecting, especially in this socially isolated time.
Yes.
But at United Way, of course, too, we continue to have, you know, community conversations, professional development workshops, lots of opportunities for us all to convene.
This is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm, and thank you, Inaudy, for, you know, all the incredible work that you do in Orange County around equity. We really appreciate it. I think we have time for one more question. If anyone else would like to.
I just want to thank Inaudy. Every time you speak, I learn more, and I learn what I don't know, to be honest, you know? So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yes,
thank you everyone for being part of the conversation. Really appreciate it as well. And definitely for just the creation of the space. I mean, I can't say it enough, especially in the times we are living right now, where these conversations are being silenced. These conversations are being sanctioned. These conversations are being taken away from spaces. So the fact that, you know, you are just saying, no, we're going to continue talking about it and bringing facts forward is really, really important. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to mention, you know, we can really have real impact. So at United Way, the purpose of our community conversations that we hold every year is to get everybody together and give us that feedback so we can revise our request for proposals. So if you have feedback, comments, please put it in the chat box. I'm serious. We're going to be taking that information very seriously as we start to draft and revise our upcoming request for proposals. And as you know, we're very concerned about the housing crisis, but we want to be making sure that we're integrating equity as much as we possibly can into our upcoming request for proposal. Does anyone have one more question? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to our next section. Okay. All right. Well, I would really like to, and there's a lot of great feedback in the chat box and lots of requests to share that information and data. And I would just like to thank you so much. Like Jeannie said, every time I hear you, I learn so much. It's really incredible. You're just, you have so much wealth of information, incredible timely research, and you just frame it in a way that we can all really just understand the most pressing issues that we're all facing. And I just really, really appreciate all of the important work you do every day for our community. Thank you, Inaudy. So we are still 115 strong. So thank you so much for being here. I am going to give everybody a 2-minute break to get up, to stretch your legs, because I know we all still need to do that, even though we're virtual, right? And I'm going to get all of our panelists, who I know are on the call, because I've been checking you off on my list, getting ready to present. And I know Freddie will be moderating in just a moment. So it is 10:02. So at 10:04, we will meet back and I will be introducing Freddie to begin moderating. So 2-minute pause. Thank you.